Fantasy isn't just a genre. It's a way to imagine how the world could have been a world built on its own rules, beliefs, and history. Good fantasy doesn't have to be realistic, but it does have to feel believable. You have to sense that this world existed before the camera started rolling, that it has memory, blood, fear, pride, and tradition. But modern Hollywood seems terrified of difference. It's afraid to show that cultures can truly be different, that values can clash, that what's good for one people might look monstrous to another. And in that fear, fantasy loses its soul. We get worlds without tension, stories without history, and imagination without imagination. In fantasy, difference is everything. When everyone looks, thinks, and acts the same, the world stops feeling alive. If an elf talks like a Californian barista, if a knight lectures about social justice, if a medieval queen debates human rights in modern slang, you don't believe in the world anymore. Tolkien once said that for a myth to matter, the reader must be able to believe it, even if only for a moment. If everything is possible, then nothing matters. Difference is what gives a world weight. Without it, there's no conflict, no story, just moral sermons in fantasy costumes. The problem isn't diversity. Diversity itself isn't bad, in fact, it's natural. Human history has always been diverse. People traded, migrated, fought, married, learned from each other. The Greeks called everyone else barbarians, yet they wore Persian robes and studied Egyptian rituals. The Romans conquered half the world, and then adopted the foods, gods, and languages of those they conquered. Even in the so-called White Middle Ages, markets in London, Florence, and Venice were filled with Arabs, Jews, Africans, and traders from Asia. Crusaders brought back not just relics, but medicine, architecture, and philosophy from the Muslim world. Diversity was real because it had a reason. It came from movement, trade, faith, war, and curiosity. The problem isn't representation. The problem is forced diversity without logic when characters exist only to tick a demographic box. That's not representation, that's marketing, a poor one. History is full of strangers who walked into worlds that weren't theirs, and every time they caused a ripple. Sometimes that ripple was fear, sometimes fascination, sometimes respect, but it was always there, and that's what makes those moments human. One of greatest examples is reasonable Blackman, the outsider who became a neighbour. In 16th century London, there lived a black silk weaver named Reasonable Blackman. He wasn't a slave. He was a free craftsman, most likely an immigrant from the Netherlands or Portugal, places that already had African communities through trade and maritime contact. So he didn't appear out of thin air the way minority characters often do in modern fantasy. His existence made sense. He was part of a real, interconnected world, one shaped by ships, merchants, and trade routes. Blackman lived among Londoners, worked for himself, and records show he had a wife and children. He wasn't a symbol or a political statement, he was just a man, a foreigner who became a neighbour without ever losing his identity. And that's what real diversity looks like when it grows naturally out of history, not from a studio memo. In the late 1500s, an African man named Yasuke arrived in Japan with Portuguese missionaries. When he was presented to the powerful warlord Oda Nobunaga, Nobunaga was so shocked by his appearance that he ordered him to be washed, thinking his dark skin was covered in soot. When he realized it was real, he was amazed. Yasuke became one of his closest attendants and friends, joined his campaigns, and stood by him until the end. Contemporary accounts describe Japanese crowds gathering in wonder. Not hatred, but awe. It wasn't racism. It was humanity meeting the unknown. Now imagine how Hollywood would handle that today. No one would even blink. The crowd would shrug and move on. Or Yasuke would be turned into a Black Panther-style superhero with a katana, delivering inspirational speeches about equality. And if someone dared to show the cultural shock, honestly, we'd get endless boardroom-safe dialogues about tolerance and inclusion. All talk, no emotion, no reality. That version of Yasuke would exist only on paper. The real one, he lived, breathed, amazed, and inspired. Real diversity has always had roots. Diversity isn't a modern invention, it's how history has always worked. Different peoples met, mixed, fought, traded, learned, and changed each other in the process. On the Kievan Rus frontier, Slavs, steppe nomads, and Varangians coexisted. sometimes as enemies, sometimes as allies, sometimes as trading partners. Those cultures clashed, but they also blended. You can still see it in the domes of Moscow's old cathedrals, with their Byzantine shapes and Central Asian geometry. Under the Golden Horde, Russians, Persians, and Tatars didn't just fight. They shared cities, traded goods, exchanged ideas. The Mongol Empire wasn't just destruction, it was connection. A bridge between China, the Middle East, and Europe. People of the past were not modern. Modern screenwriters often write medieval peasants as if they just came out of a therapy session and own a Twitter account, but people of the past weren't worse, they were just different. Their logic of life was built on honor, faith, and duty. Family, tribe, and gods were constants. To them, a stranger wasn't a representative of diversity. He was a mystery, maybe a threat, maybe a miracle. And that's what made stories about him powerful. When modern fantasy erases that reaction, it erases the entire point of having a different character at all. If everyone is instantly accepted and nothing feels foreign, then there's no conflict, no drama, no story. The perfect example of doing this right comes from the 1980s, the British series Robin of Sherwood. Still, to this day, probably the best adaptation of the Robin Hood legend. Among the heroes, there's an Arab warrior named Nasa. Originally, he was written as a one-episode honorable enemy, but audiences loved him so much, the creators made him a permanent part of Robin's band. And here's what's brilliant. The show never pretends he's just like everyone else. From the very start, we learn that Nasa was a slave brought to England by an evil sorcerer from Palestine. He fights with two curved sabers, not English swords. He greets people in Arabic. His silence and movements feel different, not exotic, just authentic. In one episode, when the heroes rescue a Jewish family from a pogrom, they turn to Nasa for help, translating, because he's from the Middle East, the same region where the Jewish people originated, and he really helps. That's real writing. He's not a diversity token, he's part of the world. He has a story, a reason, and a presence that deepens everything around him. He's alive. The sad irony is that the more Hollywood talks about diversity, the less of it we actually get. Modern studios are terrified of conflict. They're terrified of showing someone being shocked, offended, or uncomfortable. But art has always been born from conflict, from fear, from misunderstanding, from trying and sometimes failing to see another human being. Without conflict, there's no catharsis. Without catharsis, there's no emotion. Without emotion, no story. Today, instead of tension, we get lectures. Instead of characters, we get spokespeople. Instead of discovery, we get slogans. And the result? Beautiful worlds that look alive but feel like plastic. Fantasy was never meant to be a political utopia. It's a myth, a mirror for human nature, where light and darkness, good and evil, us and them all exist in tension. When Hollywood erases that difference, it doesn't destroy prejudice, it destroys wonder. The stories of Reasonable Blackman, Yasuke, and Nasa show that real diversity doesn't need to be preached. It happens through encounter, not agenda, through reaction, not slogans. Real diversity isn't statistics, it's that moment when two people from different worlds look at each other and both realize they've changed. Until Hollywood rediscovers that truth, its worlds will stay glossy, safe, and utterly lifeless.